All right, gang. So what we're going to be talking about today is absolutism and revolution in England. So absolutism in England is focused mainly on two guys, Charles I and James I, and we're going to talk about how absolutism doesn't really work out in England. So first of all, let's talk about the Stewart Kings. Well, Queen Elizabeth I did not have a son, obviously, because she was not married, and it would not have appeared appropriate for her to have a son when she wasn't married. She did not have a son, and so when she died, the next person in line was her cousin James, and James begins the line of what are called Stewart Kings. The Stewart King is the last name. So James come in, he was King of Scotland, but now he is King of England. And James had constant conflict. James had constant conflict with the Puritans because the Puritans were a Protestant group who wanted him to purify the Catholic Church the Anglican Church of all their Catholic practices. Basically, they thought the Anglican Church were too much like Catholicism, and they did not like that, and so they wanted to push him to that. He didn't really do anything for them, but he did authorize the writing or the translation of the Bible in English, and that's when we get our official King James version of the Bible. Well, when James died in 1625, his son Charles I took over. Charles I reigned from 1625 until 1649, and he really had a lot of problems. He was James' son, and Charles needed a lot of money because he was facing revolt from from Scotland, and so he had to raise a lot of money to wage war. He was waging war also with Spain and France at the same time. Well, so he had to call Parliament, and Parliament didn't like that, and they were conflicting with him quite a bit. Okay, and so in 1648, what they did was they forced him to, 1628, they forced him to sign something called the Petition of Right. And under this Petition of Right in 1628, the Petition of Right granted certain rights to all. And basically what it said was this: the king could not imprison people without reason. He couldn't pass taxes without Parliament saying it was okay. Soldiers couldn't be housed in people's homes. And last but not least, martial law or military rule couldn't be instilled in peacetime. So this Petition of Right, he didn't really like it because it took away from his authority to govern. And he did not like Parliament for forcing them to sign that. So basically he ignored it. And he ignored it for 20 years. But what happened was in 1645 or so, there was a revolt in the autumn of 1640. There was a revolt. And he had to call Parliament. And Parliament said, you know what, it's our time to act. We have not been in office for about 20 years, and so we're going to take a stand, and we are openly going to revolt. And this led to the English Civil War. The English Civil War began in 1637 and 1642, and eventually ended in 1649. So the Civil War basically was the king against Parliament, and there were two sides, obviously. It was Parliament versus the king. And Parliament obviously wanted more authority and more say in government, and the king wanted to rule absolutely. And so this is where that central conflict comes. So what they wanted to do is they said Parliament fought against the king. And the two sides that emerged are called Roundheads, or those that supported Parliament, or Cavaliers, like the Virginia Cavaliers, who supported the king. So Roundheads with these round haircuts, they look like bowl cuts kind of, and Cavaliers who supported the king. Now, Roundheads often were also Puritans. Protestant Puritans. They did not like Charles and his use of the Anglican Church. Well, eventually Parliament was losing, but eventually they found a military leader named Oliver Cromwell. And Oliver Cromwell eventually takes over and creates a commonwealth, and what is supposed to be a democracy, but ends up being a military dictatorship. And so Oliver Cromwell takes over as military leader, and he becomes a dictator from 1649 to 1659. What enables him to do that is something called the New Model Army. The New Model Army was Oliver Cromwell's army of Parliament, or for Parliament, that wound up defeating the Cavalier supporters. So the New Model Army, that's just what it's called, ends up defeating the King's Cavalier forces. Well, when they do finally end up defeating the King's forces, they actually capture the king in 1647. And what they do is, Charles is still technically the ruler, still technically the king. But in 1649, a group called the Rump Parliament put Charles I on trial, public trial, accuse him of treason, and they kill and execute him. And this is called regicide. And it's really dramatic, really sent shockwaves through Europe because never before had a king been put on trial publicly. And that's what officially begins the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth, with Oliver Cromwell as the dictatorship, rules from 1649 until 1659 and 1660, when something called the Restoration happens. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the Commonwealth. Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan. He believed in very strict religious beliefs. He basically believed in a theocracy, or rule by God's rule. It was during this time, during the Commonwealth, that Shakespeare's Globe Theater was burned. There were no plays. It was really very similar to John Calvin's Geneva, Geneva, Switzerland, where while you could enjoy yourself and you could enjoy the fruits of your labor and work, no plays, no dancing, no card playing, things like that. And so 10 years of that rule, 1649, 1659, England was pretty much fed up to it. And this led to several members of Parliament after Oliver Cromwell died saying, yeah, we want a king back. And so they wrote to Charles II, or the guy that becomes Charles II, Charles I's oldest living son. They wrote to him and invited him back. Now, Charles II was a decent king. They seemed to like him. But the problem was Charles II didn't have any heirs. Now, one of the good things that he did do was he passed something called the Writ of Habeas Corpus, or the Restoration Habeas Corpus. Now, under Habeas Corpus, this basically says that the king can't arrest someone without them knowing why, or having a sheet of paper accusing them of a specific crime. So basically, you can't accuse someone just because they disagree, or arrest someone just because they disagree with you. So that's how that worked out. Well, Charles II died without a male heir, or without an heir, and so going from that, the next in line was Charles II's brother, James II. James II became king, and here's the problem with James II. James II was a Catholic, and that really worried many of the Protestants because they didn't want England to fall back under Catholic rule. And so James II violated English rule by appointing English law by appointing several Catholics to key positions in government. That was actually illegal and against the rules and against English law at the time. And so seven members of Parliament got together and they wrote a letter to James' oldest daughter. Her name was Mary. And in 1688, something occurred called the Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution was where Protestant members of Parliament, say that 3 times fast, Parliament members of Parliament, see, I can't even say it 3 times fast, asked William and Mary to come and rule. Now, who were William and Mary? Well, Mary was James II's oldest daughter, okay? William was William of Orange. William was from the Netherlands. He was a Protestant ruler there, and those members of Parliament asked them to come in and basically overthrow the king. And what happened in 1688 is called the Glorious Revolution because it was a bloodless revolution. Okay, so William and Mary came in and they took over completely without bloodshed. James II just sort of faded away and he was no longer king. Now, here's what's important about William and Mary and the Glorious Revolution. There are 2 things. One, Parliament in English history has steadily asserted its right to have a say in government. So it's people saying, hey, the king is not absolute. Now, in reality, Parliament was more nobility, traditional nobility. But it's saying that absolutism will not work in England. It's not going to function. It's not going to be how we run our government. 2, the second major important thing that William and Mary did was they passed the English Bill of Rights. In 1689, William and Mary agreed to the English Bill of Rights. And the English Bill of Rights placed several limits on the king's authority. Again, it's Parliament going to a monarch and saying, you're going to sign this. It's saying that we're going to have a rule of law, or government must follow its own rules and its own laws. Some of the things that the English Bill of Rights did. It said the king could not suspend Parliament's laws just because he wanted to. It said there were no taxes that could be levied on the people. Again, the kings had levied taxes, placed lots of fees on the people in England because he had to fight a lot of wars. And Parliament said, no, you can't do that in the English Bill of Rights. You cannot interfere with freedom of speech in Parliament. Members of Parliament could stand up and say whatever they wanted to and be protected. Not free for everyone, but members of Parliament speaking in Parliament could openly defy the king. And lastly but not leastly, there would be no penalty or no arresting a citizen who petitions against the king, who says, hey, king, I think you're doing something wrong. You need to help me out. And so, once again, we see grants or people demanding rights from the monarch. So absolutism, in summary, absolutism in English history is the story of the kings trying to assert their absolute power, kings trying to assert their divine right, but not being able to because the people or parliament really in England say, no, 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 no. You must allow us a say in government. Okay? You must allow us to say. So in England, it works out where Parliament and the king are in constant conflict with one another, and it ends with the Glorious Revolution in 1688 and William and Mary coming to the throne and ruling. Bye.